It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell. I mean, I wouldn't have even remembered it until you start scouring through the stuff. It was literally just a wasted 20 minutes, which was a shame.
After months of denials from the White House, newspaper reporters forced Donald Trump Jr. to release emails proving that he met with this Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, to dig up dirt on then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. It sparked immediate questions over the weekend of perjury or even treason. And the fallout continues. The U.S. Secret Service caused further embarrassment when it refuted suggestions by the younger Trump that it vetted the meeting. Democrats smell blood, and they're circling the waters alongside special prosecutors. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is William Courtney. He's a former White House advisor on Russian affairs. He also participated in a number of negotiations between the U.S. and Russia that focused on issues of security. And he's a former ambassador to the former Soviet republics of Kazakhstan and Georgia. Sir, thank you very much for joining us. I'm not going to ask you what all the U.S. networks were focusing on. They've been talking about the word collusion. You're not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Let's park that aside, because I'm far more interested in the politics. Did what Donald Trump Jr. did, what he did, wrong?
Let's look at it from the Russian perspective. Russia clearly saw that Donald Trump was favorable toward Vladimir Putin during the presidential campaign. After he became the logical Republican candidate, it was more important for Russia to reach out to Trump to see what kind of possible activity, cooperation might be possible. Clearly, the Kremlin, both in its public statements and its election interference, clearly was in favor of Donald Trump. But the Kremlin probably wanted to know, is there more that they could do?
So clearly, sir, the Russians had an agenda. They reached out. How should he have responded properly?
Well, the Russians would have known that interfering in U.S. elections is something that's illegal in the United States. So to some extent, they wanted to be very careful about it. They didn't want to have a Russian government official reach out. Certainly, they wanted to use somebody who would be deniable. And so the lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, was a lawyer who's clearly been associated with Kremlin causes in the past. For example, she's lobbied against the Magnitsky Act, a U.S. congressional act that imposes sanctions because of Russian human rights violations. The Kremlin wanted to use someone who was deniable like that to reach out to test the Trump campaign to see whether they might be willing to cooperate in some way.
How about former Soviet counterintelligence official Rinat Akhmetshin? Is he also deniable?
He is a lobbyist. He's a Russian and American citizen, dual citizen, operating here in Washington. He is deniable in a sense. He's not a Russian government official, at least in a declared sense, but he's been lobbying on behalf of Russian government causes for a long time. So both Veselnitskaya and Akhmetshin have ties to the Russian government, but neither is a government official, at least in a declared sense.
Okay, so from your first few answers, you've sort of made it clear that it's your opinion that Russia intended to meddle in some way in the election, right? Maybe they were fishing. Right.
It's quite clear that Russia did tend to meddle. As we know, there was election interference, a subsequent release of emails that had been hacked by Russian intelligence, released through WikiLeaks. And of course, Russian government public statements have been fairly positive toward Trump and quite negative toward Hillary Clinton. President Vladimir Putin in 2012 claimed that then Secretary of State Clinton sent a signal to anti-government demonstrators in Moscow. So clearly the Kremlin was trying to favor Donald Trump.
Yeah, so at the moment, the Trump administration seems to be, well, initially there was just sort of, they were denying everything, and now they're saying, they're playing dumb, right? Now, do you believe that there was naivety or there was clear foreknowledge of the implications of what they were getting into when they were having these meetings with the Russians?
It's hard to know specifically what may have been the attitude of Donald Trump Jr., for example. Paul Manafort was in the meeting, though. He's an experienced campaign official in Washington, so he would have known what the laws were. The Russians, nonetheless, decided to take the risk of trying to have this conversation. Perhaps their main goal was trying to figure out, is there anything more they could do to help Donald Trump?
Do you believe that this is big enough to bring down the presidency?
It's just too soon to speculate on anything like that. What is clear is that the Kremlin, while it tried to help Donald Trump in the election, there's been such a strong blowback from U.S. Congress and others that the Kremlin has probably, through its actions, done a lot of damage to potential U.S.-Russian cooperation.
So with that in mind, did Putin make a mistake?
Yes, I think this clearly is a big mistake. There's a big difference, for example, between interfering in the French elections, where Marine Le Pen actively courted Vladimir Putin's support, whereas in the United States, there's much greater suspicion of Kremlin activities over here. So traditionally in the past, even in the Soviet period, they were a little bit more reluctant to try to interfere in U.S. elections. Putin took a risk that turned out to have been an excessive risk, and there's been a lot of political cost to Russia and to U.S.-Russian relations as a result.
Having been at the table in the past, tell me what goes on behind the scenes now, because there seems to be a split personality here. You have all these multiple arms of government freaking out at the possibility that Russia tried to meddle, might have meddled, and that the candidate might have sort of been involved with the Russians in trying to get dirt on the other candidate, and they might have actually, helped him to the post. You have that. You have the White House who's in denial, and then they're saying, oh, it means nothing. It was nothing. We were just looking for a little bit of dirt on the opposition, or we were just scouting the opposition. With all of that in mind, what's going on behind the scenes in terms of U.S.-Russia relations right now?
Well, a key issue in this was, what was the Kremlin trying to achieve in the meetings with Veselnitskaya and Akhmetshin with Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner? Was the Russian goal just to show that they were willing to cooperate, to try to be helpful in a general sense? Or were the documents that Veselnitskaya apparently turned over to Donald Trump Jr., were those documents going further? For example, were the Kremlin representatives, were they trying to see whether the Trump campaign might have a reaction to other activities that the Kremlin was doing? For example, did the Russians preview to them that they might be releasing thousands of Hillary Clinton emails through WikiLeaks, which happened later? So it's a little bit unclear, but the Kremlin clearly had some important purposes in mind in taking the risk of having this kind of meeting.
Yeah, let's have a little listen to what Nancy Pelosi had to say very recently, and I'll get your comment off the back of that. Have a listen to this.
It is important that we see all electronic communication, whether it's direct messaging, Twitter, email, text, whatever it happens to be, among the members of the Trump family and within the Trump administration. Did he convey that message, that the spirit of that message to the president? The American people have a right to know.
Now, Ambassador Courtney, from a political perspective, the Democrats smell blood. This is manna from heaven for them. Putting that aside, is Nancy Pelosi asking the right question in terms of the national security of the United States and the questions that all Americans need answered?
Well, the key question is, what was the Kremlin purpose in having this meeting? Did the Kremlin think that it would be worthwhile to try to have some kind of cooperation with the Trump campaign? Clearly, the fact that Donald Trump Jr. accepted the meeting sent a positive sign to the Kremlin that campaign was perhaps open to some kind of conversation. But it still is not yet clear what the Kremlin full purpose was in reaching out like this. Was it to preview the release of the Clinton emails, or was there some other purpose? That's still unknown.
Ambassador William Courtney, it's been good to talk to you. Thank you very much.